Captain Sarah Martinez had been looking forward to this fishing trip for months. After 15 years of military service, including 8 years with the Army's elite special forces, she had finally bought her dream boat, a modest 30-foot fishing vessel she named Silent Thunder. The name held deep meaning for her, representing both her military past and her hopes for peaceful days ahead on the water. The morning sun painted the Atlantic Ocean in brilliant shades of gold and orange as Sarah prepared her gear at the marina in Jacksonville, Florida. She had earned this peace. Her body bore the invisible scars of 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq, where she had served as a communications specialist with the 5th Special Forces Group. The transition to civilian life hadn't been easy, but being on the water helped quiet the memories that sometimes surfaced without warning. Sarah checked her fishing equipment methodically, the same attention to detail that had kept her and her team alive in hostile territory. Her tackle box was organized with military precision, each lure and hook in its designated place. She had loaded enough supplies for a 3-day solo fishing expedition to her favorite spot, about 40 miles offshore where the Gulf Stream brought in various species of game fish. As she started the boat's engine, Sarah noticed the familiar hum that always brought her comfort. She had spent considerable time learning every mechanical aspect of the vessel, just as she had once memorized the specifications of radio equipment and satellite communication systems. Self-reliance had been drilled into her during her Special Forces training, and old habits died hard. The marina was relatively quiet at this early hour. A few other fishing enthusiasts were preparing their boats, and Sarah exchanged friendly nods with fellow anglers she had come to know over the past year. None of them knew about her military background. She preferred it that way, wanting to be judged simply as another person who loved the ocean rather than through the lens of her service record. Sarah's boat was equipped with all the necessary safety equipment and proper documentation. She carried her captain's license, boat registration, fishing permits, and all required safety gear. Having spent years ensuring her military unit followed regulations to the letter, she brought the same thoroughness to her civilian activities. Every piece of paperwork was current and properly stored in waterproof containers. As she navigated out of the marina and into open water, Sarah felt the familiar sense of freedom that came with leaving land behind. The boat handled beautifully in the calm morning seas, and she settled into the rhythm of traveling to her chosen fishing grounds. The GPS coordinates were programmed, and she estimated arrival at her destination in about 2 hours. During her military service, Sarah had often dreamed of moments like this, peaceful time on the water with nothing but the horizon ahead and the sound of waves against the hull. Those dreams had sustained her through difficult missions and long deployments. Now that she was living that dream, she felt grateful for every quiet moment. The fishing spot Sarah had chosen was known for its deep waters and abundant marine life. She had discovered it through careful study of charts and conversations with local fishermen. The area was well within legal fishing boundaries, far from any restricted zones or shipping lanes. Sarah had always been thorough in her research, whether planning a military operation or a fishing expedition. As she approached her destination, Sarah began preparing her fishing gear. She had become quite skilled at deep-sea fishing over the past year, learning from experienced anglers and practicing different techniques. The methodical approach that had made her an excellent soldier also made her a patient and successful fisherman. She understood that both activities required careful planning, attention to detail, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions. The water was particularly beautiful that morning, with excellent visibility and gentle swells. Sarah anchored her boat and began setting up her fishing lines. She had brought various baits and lures, hoping to catch some of the larger species that frequented these waters. The peaceful solitude was exactly what she needed after a stressful week at her civilian job working for a defense contractor. Sarah's military identification card was safely stored in her wallet, along with her other important documents. She rarely thought about it anymore, except when renewing security clearances for her current work. The Special Forces tab and various commendations on her record represented a chapter of her life she was proud of but ready to move beyond. She had served with honor, earned the respect of her peers, and completed her military obligations with distinction. As she cast her first line, Sarah reflected on how different her life had become. The constant vigilance and heightened awareness that had defined her military years were slowly giving way to a more relaxed mindset. She was learning to enjoy simple pleasures like the feeling of sun on her face and the satisfaction of a successful fishing trip. The morning passed peacefully as Sarah worked her fishing lines and enjoyed the solitude. She caught several smaller fish and released them, hopping for larger game fish as the day progressed. The technique and patience required for successful fishing reminded her of certain aspects of Special Forces work, the need to remain focused while waiting for the right moment to act. Sarah had no way of knowing that her peaceful fishing expedition was about to take an unexpected turn. In a few hours, her military training would prove more relevant than she could have imagined. The skills she had hoped to leave behind would suddenly become necessary once again, though in a completely different context than anything she had experienced during her years in uniform. As she adjusted her fishing lines and settled in for a long day on the water, Sarah felt completely at peace. The boat rocked gently in the swells, and she looked forward to what she expected would be an uneventful day of fishing. She had earned this tranquility through years of service to her country, and she intended to savor every moment of it. The challenges ahead were unimaginable to her at that peaceful moment on the ocean. By midday, Sarah had settled into the peaceful rhythm of deep-sea fishing. The sun was higher now, warming her face as she monitored her lines and adjusted her position to follow the fish. She had caught and released several smaller species, but was still hopping for one of the larger game fish that made these waters famous among serious anglers. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in brilliant blues under the clear Florida sky. Sarah felt completely relaxed for the first time in weeks. Her civilian job, while rewarding, often brought stress as she worked with military contractors on communication systems. Being alone on the water reminded her why she had chosen fishing as her primary hobby after leaving the Army. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Sarah noticed a vessel approaching from the northeast. At first, it appeared to be just another boat on the horizon, which wasn't unusual in these popular fishing waters. However, as it drew closer, she could make out the distinctive markings of a United States Coast Guard cutter. The sight triggered an automatic response from her military training, heightened awareness and mental preparation for interaction with authority figures. Sarah had no reason to be concerned about a Coast Guard inspection. Her boat was properly registered, she carried all required safety equipment, her fishing license was current, and she was well within legal fishing boundaries. During her military service, she had always maintained strict adherence to regulations, and she brought the same discipline to her civilian activities. Still, something about the approaching vessel made her instinctively alert. The Coast Guard cutter was a 47-foot motor lifeboat, a workhorse vessel designed for search and rescue operations as well as law enforcement activities. As it approached, Sarah could see several crew members on deck, and she noticed they were definitely heading directly toward her position rather than simply passing through the area. She reeled in her fishing lines and prepared for what she assumed would be a routine safety inspection. When the Coast Guard vessel pulled alongside her boat, Sarah immediately noticed the serious expressions on the faces of the boarding party. There were 4 Coast Guard personnel visible, a petty officer who appeared to be in charge, 2 seamen, and what looked like a more senior enlisted member. Their body language and demeanor suggested this was more than a routine inspection, though Sarah couldn't imagine what might have triggered their interest in her boat. The petty officer in charge called out across the water between the vessels. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am, we need to conduct a boarding and inspection of your vessel. Please prepare to receive our boarding party and have your documentation ready for review." The formal tone and specific wording immediately told Sarah this was a serious matter, not a friendly safety check. Sarah responded with the same professional courtesy she had always shown to fellow service members, even though she was now a civilian. "Understood. I have all my documentation ready and will assist with your inspection." She moved to secure her fishing gear and make room for the boarding party. Her military training kicked in automatically, compliance with lawful orders while maintaining situational awareness of everything happening around her. As the Coast Guard personnel prepared to board her vessel, Sarah noticed they were treating this as a potential law enforcement action rather than a routine inspection. They were wearing sidearms and had additional equipment that suggested they were prepared for something more serious than checking safety gear and fishing licenses. The senior enlisted member appeared to be taking photographs of her boat, which struck Sarah as unusual for a standard inspection. The boarding process was conducted with military precision. The lead petty officer stepped onto Sarah's boat first, followed by one of the seamen who immediately began examining her safety equipment. The petty officer's nameplate read PM2 Collins, and his demeanor was strictly professional but not unfriendly. He asked Sarah to present her identification and boat documentation while his partner conducted the safety inspection. Sarah handed over her driver's license, boat registration, and fishing permits. All of her documents were current and properly maintained, stored in waterproof containers as she had been taught to protect important papers during her military service. PM2 Collins examined each document carefully, comparing information and making notes on a clipboard. Meanwhile, his partner was conducting a thorough examination of her safety equipment and fishing gear. During the inspection, Sarah noticed the Coast Guard personnel were particularly interested in her navigation equipment and communication gear. They asked detailed questions about her GPS system, radio equipment, and electronic fish finders. Their questions seemed unusually specific, as if they were looking for something particular rather than conducting a general safety inspection. Sarah answered all questions honestly and completely, though she was beginning to wonder what had prompted such detailed scrutiny. The inspection continued for nearly 30 minutes, far longer than any routine safety check Sarah had experienced. The Coast Guard team examined every compartment of her boat, looked at her fishing gear in detail, and asked numerous questions about her activities that day. They wanted to know exactly when she had left port, what route she had taken to reach her current position, and whether she had encountered any other vessels during her trip. PM2 Collins asked Sarah about her background and what she did for a living. She explained that she worked for a defense contractor in communication systems, which seemed to generate additional interest from the Coast Guard team. They asked follow-up questions about her work and her familiarity with various types of electronic equipment. Sarah answered their questions, but was becoming increasingly curious about the purpose of this extensive inspection. As the inspection progressed, Sarah began to sense that the Coast Guard personnel were treating her as a potential suspect in some kind of investigation, rather than simply conducting a routine safety check. Their questions became more pointed, and she noticed they were paying particular attention to her answers while continuing to examine her boat with unusual thoroughness. The situation was beginning to feel more like an interrogation than an inspection. Finally, PM2 Collins asked Sarah directly if she had any military background or experience with communications equipment. The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Sarah realized that her calm, professional responses to their questions and her organized boat might have suggested military training. She was faced with a decision about how much information to reveal about her background, not knowing what had prompted this unusual level of scrutiny from the Coast Guard team. Sarah looked directly at PM2 Collins when he asked about her military background. Something in his tone suggested this question was more significant than the others, and she decided honesty was the best approach. "Yes, I served in the Army for 15 years. I'm retired now and work as a civilian contractor." She kept her response brief, not wanting to volunteer more information than necessary until she understood what was driving this intensive inspection. The petty officer made additional notes on his clipboard and exchanged glances with his team members. Sarah noticed increased interest in their expressions when she mentioned her military service. Collins asked for more details about her Army experience, specifically what her job had been and when she had retired. Sarah explained that she had worked in communications and had retired the previous year, but she still wasn't sure why this information was relevant to a boat inspection. At that point, the senior enlisted member who had been photographing her boat approached PM2 Collins and spoke quietly in his ear. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw both men look at her with renewed interest. The senior petty officer then asked Sarah directly whether she had any specialized training or security clearances, current or former. The question confirmed her suspicion that this inspection was related to something more serious than routine maritime law enforcement. Sarah realized she needed more information about why she was being questioned so intensively. She asked PM2 Collins directly what this inspection was about and whether she was suspected of any wrongdoing. Her military training had taught her to ask direct questions when faced with unclear situations, and she felt entitled to understand why her peaceful fishing trip had turned into what felt like an investigation. Collins explained that they had received reports of suspicious activity in the area, including possible smuggling operations using small boats similar to hers. He said they were conducting enhanced inspections of all vessels in the area as part of an ongoing investigation. Sarah immediately understood why her boat had attracted attention. It was the right size and type that smugglers often used, and her solo operation might have appeared suspicious to surveillance aircraft or other vessels. The explanation made sense, but Sarah was still concerned about the intensive nature of the questioning. She had done nothing wrong and wanted to cooperate fully, but she was also aware that innocent people could sometimes become entangled in investigations through circumstances beyond their control. Her special forces training had taught her to remain calm under pressure while protecting her own interests. When Collins asked again about her specific military background, Sarah decided to provide more complete information. She explained that she had served with the 5th Special Forces Group and had been deployed multiple times to combat zones. She mentioned her communications specialty and her current security clearance for her civilian job. The information seemed to have an immediate impact on the Coast Guard personnel, who began treating her with noticeably more respect. The senior petty officer, whose nameplate read Poe 1 Rodriguez, asked Sarah if she had any documentation of her military service with her. Sarah explained that she carried her retired military ID card, but rarely used it since leaving the Army. Rodriguez asked if she would be willing to show the ID to help verify her background. Sarah agreed, understanding that her military credentials might help resolve whatever concerns had prompted this inspection. Sarah retrieved her military ID card from her wallet and handed it to Poe 1 Rodriguez. The card clearly identified her as a retired Army Sergeant First Class with Special Forces qualifications. Rodriguez examined the ID carefully, comparing the photograph to Sarah's face and noting the various markings that indicated her specialized training and security clearance level. He then showed the ID to PM2 Collins, and Sarah could see both men's attitudes shift significantly. The military ID card contained several elements that immediately validated Sarah's credentials to the Coast Guard personnel. The Special Forces tab was clearly visible, along with markings indicating her combat deployments and security clearance level. Rodriguez, who Sarah learned was a former Navy Special Operations member himself, recognized the significance of her qualifications and began explaining the situation more fully to his team members. Collins apologized to Sarah for the intensive nature of the inspection and explained that they had been tracking what appeared to be a sophisticated smuggling operation in the area. Intelligence reports suggested the operation involved individuals with military training who were using advanced communication equipment to coordinate their activities. Sarah's organized boat, professional demeanor, and obvious comfort with maritime operations had unfortunately matched the profile they were investigating. The Coast Guard team continued their inspection, but with a completely different attitude. Instead of treating Sarah as a potential suspect, they began asking for her professional opinion about the communication equipment they had observed during their investigation. Rodriguez explained that they suspected the smugglers were using military-grade encrypted radios and sophisticated navigation equipment to avoid detection by Coast Guard patrols. Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of being consulted as an expert rather than questioned as a suspect. Her knowledge of communication systems and her understanding of how military personnel might approach clandestine operations made her insights valuable to the Coast Guard investigation. She was able to explain how certain types of equipment could be used to monitor Coast Guard radio frequencies and avoid patrol patterns. As the conversation progressed, Sarah learned more about the scope of the smuggling operation the Coast Guard was investigating. Rodriguez explained that they believed a well-organized group was bringing drugs and possibly other contraband through the area using small boats operated by individuals with military training. The operation appeared to be more sophisticated than typical smuggling attempts, with evidence of advanced planning and professional execution. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Her peaceful fishing trip had been interrupted because her own competence and military bearing had made her appear suspicious to investigators looking for people with exactly her background and skills. However, once her legitimate credentials were established, that same background made her a valuable resource for understanding the criminal operation they were trying to stop. PM2 Collins asked Sarah if she had noticed any unusual vessel activity during her time in the area. She thought carefully about her morning on the water and realized that she had seen several boats that had struck her as operating oddly. Her military-trained situational awareness had noted things that seemed out of place, though she hadn't given them much thought at the time. Now, she understood that her observations might be relevant to the Coast Guard investigation. Sarah described the boats she had noticed, including one that had appeared to be conducting some kind of surveillance of Coast Guard patrol patterns, and another that had quickly changed course when she appeared in the area. Her detailed recollection and professional analysis of what she had observed impressed the Coast Guard team and provided them with valuable intelligence about the smuggling operation they were investigating. The atmosphere on Sarah's boat had completely transformed once the Coast Guard team understood her background. Po-1 Rodriguez began sharing more details about their investigation, treating Sarah as a fellow professional rather than a potential criminal. He explained that the smuggling operation they were tracking had been active for several months and appeared to involve former military personnel who were using their training to evade law enforcement. Rodriguez described how the smugglers had demonstrated sophisticated knowledge of Coast Guard operations, including patrol schedules, communication frequencies, and standard interdiction procedures. The criminals seemed to understand exactly how to avoid detection, suggesting they had insider knowledge of maritime law enforcement techniques. This level of professionalism had made the case particularly challenging for the Coast Guard investigators. Sarah listened carefully to the information Rodriguez shared, her special forces training automatically analyzing the tactical situation. She began to understand why her boat and behavior had triggered suspicion. The smugglers were apparently using the same methodical approach and attention to detail that she brought to her own activities. Her military bearing and organized vessel had unfortunately matched the profile the Coast Guard was investigating. As the conversation continued, Sarah realized that her observations from the morning might be more significant than she had initially thought. She described to Rodriguez the boat that had been conducting what appeared to be surveillance activities. She had noticed it maintaining a consistent distance from Coast Guard vessels while using what looked like advanced optical equipment to monitor their movements. Her trained eye had recognized surveillance techniques that civilian observers would likely miss. Rodriguez became particularly interested when Sarah described the second boat that had changed course abruptly when she appeared in the area. She explained that the vessel had been operating in a pattern that suggested the crew was conducting some kind of covert activity. When her fishing boat came into view, they had immediately altered their behavior and moved away from the area. Sarah's military experience told her this was classic counter-surveillance behavior. The information Sarah provided helped the Coast Guard team understand that they were dealing with a sophisticated operation run by individuals with advanced training. Rodriguez explained that previous attempts to catch the smugglers had failed because the criminals seemed to anticipate Coast Guard tactics and adjust their operations accordingly. Sarah's insights into military thinking and operational security might prove valuable in developing new interdiction strategies. PM 2 Collins asked Sarah if she would be willing to provide a formal statement about her observations that morning. He explained that her detailed recollection of the suspicious vessel activities could provide crucial intelligence for their ongoing investigation. Sarah agreed to help, understanding that her information might prevent dangerous drugs from reaching communities along the coast. As they prepared the statement, Rodriguez shared more details about the scope of the smuggling operation. Intelligence reports suggested the group was bringing significant quantities of illegal drugs through the area, along with possibly other contraband, including weapons. The operation appeared to be well-funded and professionally managed, with evidence of careful planning and execution that suggested military-level organization and discipline. Sarah found herself drawn into the investigation in a way she had never anticipated. Her peaceful fishing trip had unexpectedly connected her with a serious law enforcement operation. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same skills and training that had initially made her a suspect were now making her a valuable asset to the investigation. Her ability to recognize and analyze suspicious behavior was proving useful to the Coast Guard team. Rodriguez asked Sarah about her current work with defense contractors, wondering if her professional activities might provide additional insights relevant to their investigation. Sarah explained that her job involved designing communication systems for military applications, which gave her deep knowledge of the type of equipment the smugglers might be using. Her expertise could help the Coast Guard understand how to counter the advanced technology the criminals were employing. The conversation revealed that the smuggling operation had been causing significant problems for multiple law enforcement agencies. The criminals' sophisticated approach and apparent military training had allowed them to evade traditional interdiction methods. Sarah's background gave her a unique perspective on how military-trained individuals might approach such an operation, including their likely planning methods and operational security measures. As they discussed the case, Sarah began to see patterns in the smugglers' behavior that reminded her of special operations techniques. The careful surveillance of law enforcement activities, the use of advanced communication equipment, and the professional execution of their operations all suggested individuals with special forces or similar elite military training. This realization made her even more committed to helping the Coast Guard team. Rodriguez explained that the Coast Guard had been working with other federal agencies on the case, including the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The multi-agency approach reflected the serious nature of the operation and the challenges posed by the smugglers' sophisticated methods. Sarah's insights might prove valuable not just to the Coast Guard, but to the entire law enforcement effort. Sarah offered to share her professional knowledge of communication systems that might be relevant to the investigation. She explained how certain types of military equipment could be adapted for civilian use while maintaining their advanced capabilities. This information could help the Coast Guard understand what technology the smugglers might be using and how to develop effective countermeasures. The discussion had lasted for over an hour, and Sarah realized that her simple fishing trip had evolved into an unexpected opportunity to serve her country in a new way. While she had left active military service, her skills and knowledge were still valuable for protecting national security interests. The chance to help stop a dangerous criminal operation gave her a sense of purpose reminiscent of her Special Forces missions. Rodriguez and Collins conferred privately while Sarah organized her thoughts about the additional information she might be able to provide. She realized that her unique combination of Special Forces training, communication systems expertise, and recent observations in the area made her an unusually valuable resource for the investigation. Her willingness to help could significantly advance the law enforcement effort. When the Coast Guard team returned their attention to Sarah, Rodriguez asked if she would consider providing ongoing assistance to their investigation. He explained that her expertise and willingness to help could prove crucial in finally stopping the smuggling operation. Sarah found herself faced with an unexpected opportunity to use her military skills in service of her country once again, though in a completely different context than anything she had experienced during her Army career. Sarah considered Rodriguez's request carefully. The opportunity to assist in a significant law enforcement operation appealed to the part of her that missed the purposeful mission focus of her military career. However, she also understood the potential risks and complications that could arise from involvement in an active criminal investigation. Her Special Forces training had taught her to carefully evaluate any mission before committing to participate. Rodriguez seemed to understand her hesitation and explained that they weren't asking her to participate in any dangerous operations. Instead, they needed her expertise to help them understand the smugglers' methods and develop more effective countermeasures. Her knowledge of military tactics, communication systems, and operational planning could provide crucial insights that might finally allow them to disrupt the criminal network. Sarah asked for more specific information about what kind of assistance they needed. Rodriguez explained that the Coast Guard had been struggling to predict the smugglers' movements and intercept their operations. The criminals seemed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement efforts, suggesting they had sophisticated intelligence gathering capabilities and professional operational security measures that traditional investigative methods had been unable to penetrate. The Coast Guard team believed that Sarah's background could help them think like the smugglers and anticipate their next moves. Her experience with special operations planning might reveal vulnerabilities in the criminal organization that other investigators had missed. Additionally, her technical expertise with communication systems could help them understand how the smugglers were gathering intelligence and coordinating their activities. Sarah realized that this was an opportunity to use her skills in service of her country without returning to active military duty. The work would be challenging and meaningful, similar to the missions that had driven her to excel during her Army career. After 15 years of military service, she still felt a strong sense of duty to protect American communities from threats, whether foreign or domestic. After careful consideration, Sarah agreed to provide assistance to the Coast Guard investigation. She emphasized that her primary concern was ensuring the operation remained within legal boundaries and that her involvement wouldn't compromise her security clearance or her civilian employment. Rodriguez assured her that all activities would be conducted according to proper law enforcement procedures and with appropriate coordination through official channels. Rodriguez contacted his superior officer via radio to report the development and request approval for Sarah's involvement in the investigation. While they waited for authorization, he shared additional details about the scope of the smuggling operation. The criminals were reportedly moving significant quantities of drugs through multiple routes, with evidence suggesting they were also involved in weapons trafficking and money laundering activities. The conversation revealed that the smuggling organization had been active for at least 2 years, gradually expanding their operations and becoming increasingly sophisticated in their methods. Intelligence reports suggested the group was led by former military personnel who were recruiting other veterans with specialized skills. The organization appeared to be well-funded and professionally managed, making it particularly dangerous and difficult to infiltrate. Sarah's Special Forces background gave her unique insights into how such an organization might be structured and operated. She explained to Rodriguez how military-trained leaders would likely organize their operations, including their probable command structure, communication protocols, and operational security measures. Her analysis helped the Coast Guard team understand why their previous efforts had been unsuccessful. When authorization came through for Sarah's involvement, Rodriguez outlined the specific assistance they needed. The Coast Guard wanted her to review their intelligence files and provide tactical analysis of the smugglers' operations. They also needed her technical expertise to help them understand the communication equipment the criminals were using and develop methods to intercept or disrupt their communications. Sarah agreed to visit the Coast Guard station later that week to review the case files and meet with the full investigative team. She would also bring her technical knowledge of communication systems to help them understand the equipment the smugglers might be using. Her involvement would be conducted through official channels with proper documentation and authorization from her current employer's security office. The arrangement would allow Sarah to contribute her expertise while maintaining her civilian status and employment. She would work as a technical consultant to the Coast Guard, providing analysis and recommendations based on her military experience and professional knowledge. The formal structure would protect both her interests and the integrity of the investigation. As the Coast Guard team prepared to leave her boat, Rodriguez thanked Sarah for her willingness to assist with the investigation. He emphasized how valuable her insights had already proven and expressed optimism that her involvement might provide the breakthrough they needed to finally stop the smuggling operation. Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose that reminded her of the satisfaction she had found in her military missions. PM2 Collins apologized again for the intensive inspection that had initially treated Sarah as a suspect rather than a potential ally. He explained that the Coast Guard had been under pressure to produce results in the case, which had led them to pursue every possible lead aggressively. Sarah understood their position and appreciated their professionalism once her background was established. Before departing, Rodriguez provided Sarah with contact information for the investigation team and explained the security protocols she would need to follow. Her involvement would be classified at an appropriate level to protect the ongoing investigation while allowing her to access the information necessary to provide effective assistance. The formal procedures reminded Sarah of the careful operational security measures she had followed during her military career. As the Coast Guard vessel prepared to depart, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn her peaceful fishing trip had taken. What had begun as a simple day on the water had evolved into an opportunity to serve her country in a new way. The prospect of using her military skills to help stop dangerous criminals gave her a sense of purpose she had been missing since leaving active duty. Rodriguez's final words emphasized the importance of the mission and the potential impact of Sarah's contribution. He explained that stopping this particular smuggling operation could prevent significant amounts of drugs from reaching communities throughout the region. The work would be challenging, but could make a real difference in protecting innocent people from the harm caused by illegal drug trafficking. Sarah watched as the Coast Guard cutter departed, already beginning to think about the tactical challenges of the investigation. Her mind automatically shifted into the analytical mode that had made her effective as a Special Forces operator. She began considering how she would approach the problem of understanding and disrupting a sophisticated criminal organization run by individuals with military training similar to her own. 3 days later, Sarah walked into the Coast Guard station in Jacksonville, carrying a briefcase containing her analysis of the case materials Rodriguez had sent her to review. She had spent hours studying the intelligence reports, surveillance photos, and communication intercepts related to the smuggling operation. Her special forces training and intelligence analysis had proven invaluable in identifying patterns and connections that previous investigators had missed. Sarah was escorted to a secure conference room where she met the full investigative team. In addition to Rodriguez and Collins, there were representatives from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The multi-agency composition emphasized the serious nature of the case and the resources being devoted to stopping the smuggling operation. The team leader, a Coast Guard lieutenant commander named Patricia Williams, welcomed Sarah and explained the current status of the investigation. Despite months of effort and significant resources, law enforcement agencies had been unable to intercept any smuggling operations or arrest key members of the criminal organization. The smugglers seemed to anticipate every law enforcement move and adjust their operations accordingly. Sarah presented her analysis of the case materials, beginning with her assessment of the criminal organization's structure and leadership. Based on the operational patterns she had observed in the intelligence reports, she believed the group was led by someone with extensive special operations experience, possibly at the senior non-commissioned officer or junior officer level. The sophisticated planning and execution suggested military training at the highest levels. Her analysis revealed that the smugglers were using classic military intelligence gathering techniques to monitor law enforcement activities. They appeared to have established an intelligence network that provided them with advance warning of Coast Guard operations. This explained why previous interdiction attempts had failed. The criminals knew when and where law enforcement would strike and simply avoided those areas. Sarah recommended that the investigation team change their approach completely. Instead of trying to catch the smugglers in the act, she suggested using counterintelligence techniques to feed false information to the criminal organization. If law enforcement could control what intelligence the smugglers received, they could manipulate the criminals into operating in areas where they could be successfully intercepted. The recommendation required careful coordination between multiple agencies and sophisticated operational security measures. Sarah explained how similar techniques had been used successfully in military operations against enemy forces. The key was identifying how the smugglers were gathering their intelligence and then using those same channels to provide misleading information that would drive them into traps. Lieutenant Commander Williams was impressed with Sarah's analysis and asked her to help develop a comprehensive counterintelligence operation. Sarah agreed, understanding that this level of involvement would require her to take extended leave from her civilian job. However, the opportunity to lead a complex operation against a sophisticated enemy reminded her of the challenges she had thrived on during her military career. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked closely with the multi-agency team to design and implement the counterintelligence operation. They identified several sources that the smugglers were likely using to gather information about law enforcement activities, including corrupt port employees, sympathetic local boat operators, and sophisticated electronic surveillance of Coast Guard communications. Each source required a different approach to neutralize or exploit. The operation Sarah designed involved creating false intelligence about planned Coast Guard operations while secretly preparing real interdiction efforts in different areas. The team would feed information about fake patrol schedules and inspection points to known intelligence sources, while actually positioning resources to intercept smuggling operations in areas the criminals would consider safe. Implementing the plan required precise coordination and careful operational security. Sarah drew on her special forces experience to ensure that only essential personnel knew the true details of the operation. Even within the investigative team, information was compartmentalized to prevent inadvertent disclosure that might compromise the mission. The first test of Sarah's strategy came 2 weeks after implementation. Intelligence sources reported that the smuggling organization was planning a major operation, apparently scheduled to take advantage of what they believed would be reduced Coast Guard presence in their operational area. Sarah's team was ready, with hidden surveillance assets and interdiction forces positioned to respond when the smugglers appeared. The operation unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. The smugglers operated openly in an area they believed was safe from law enforcement, apparently confident in their intelligence about Coast Guard activities. When the interdiction forces moved in, the criminals were completely surprised and unable to escape. For the first time in the 2-year investigation, law enforcement successfully intercepted an active smuggling operation. The arrested smugglers confirmed many of Sarah's assessments about their organization. The leader was indeed a former Special Forces sergeant major who had recruited other military veterans to run a sophisticated criminal enterprise. They had been using advanced technology and professional operational techniques to stay ahead of law enforcement efforts. Sarah's counterintelligence operation had finally neutralized their advantages. The success led to additional arrests as investigators followed leads developed from the initial captures. Within 6 months, the entire smuggling network was dismantled, resulting in the seizure of millions of dollars in drugs and weapons. Sarah's expertise had proven crucial in developing the tactics needed to defeat a military-trained criminal organization. Lieutenant Commander Williams recommended Sarah for a civilian service award recognizing her contributions to national security. The commendation noted that her unique combination of special forces training and technical expertise had been essential to the successful conclusion of a major law enforcement operation. Sarah felt the same pride in mission accomplishment that had driven her throughout her military career. As the investigation concluded, Sarah reflected on how her peaceful fishing trip had led to one of the most satisfying experiences of her post-military life. The opportunity to use her skills in service of her country had given her a sense of purpose that civilian employment alone couldn't provide. She had found a way to continue serving while building her new life outside the military. Sarah returned to her civilian job with a renewed sense of confidence in her transition from military to civilian life. The successful operation had proven that her skills remained valuable and that she could contribute to important missions in new ways. She had also discovered that her military training would always be part of who she was, available when her country needed those capabilities. Months later, as Sarah returned to her regular fishing trips, she carried her military ID with pride rather than as a forgotten reminder of her past. The card represented not just her service record, but her continuing commitment to protecting her country and her communities. She had learned that leaving active duty didn't mean leaving service behind. It simply meant finding new ways to contribute to causes larger than herself.